Chapter 4.2, Trigonometric Functions, the unit circle. So we're going to identify unit circle, describe its relationship to real numbers, evaluate trig functions using the unit circle, use domain and period to evaluate sine and cosine functions, and then we can use the calculator to evaluate trig functions as well. So we have, if you look at the unit circle given by x squared plus y squared equals 1, we can imagine wrapping a real number line around this circle. And as that real number line wraps around the unit circle, each real number t corresponds to a point xy on the circle. Each real number t also corresponds to a central angle in standard position, whose radian measure is t. And so we have s equals r theta. So we're going to take a look at the 6 trig functions: sine, cosine, cotangent, sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So abbreviations for these are sine, cosecant, cosine, secant, tangent, and cotangent. So definitions of the trig functions is that let t be a real number and let xy be the point on the unit circle corresponding to t. So just to reiterate, this is the unit circle, and with the unit circle, the radius is 1. So sine of t equals y, so it's whatever the y value is. Cosine is the x value. Tangent is y over x, sine over cosine. Then cosecant is a reciprocal of sine. Secant is a reciprocal of cosine, and cotangent is a reciprocal of tangent. So notice it's x over y. So it'll be very helpful to memorize the common values on the unit circle. So we're going to evaluate trig functions at each real number. So these are the common ones that are used. So we have pi over 6, 5 pi over 4, and pi, and t is negative pi over 3. So we have to know where these are on the unit circle. Pi over 6 is about here, and that's about 30 degrees. And so at pi over 6, we have to think about our x and y values at those points. So at 30 degrees, our x value is root 3 over 2, and our y value is 1/2. So I'm going to write that here, root 3 over 2 and 1/2. So sine of pi over 6, that's the y value, that's just 1/2. Cosine is the x value, so that's root 3 over 2. Tangent, remember that's y over x, so that is going to be 1/2 over root 3 over 2. And once you simplify that, that ends up being root 3 over 3. Cosecant of pi over 6 is just reciprocal of sine, so that's 2. Then secant of pi over 6, that is 2 root 3 over 3. And cotangent will just be square root of 3. So you might find it helpful to just write down what is that point at 5 pi over 4. So for any radians with 4 in the denominator, we know that has to be our root 2 and root 2 over 2, okay? And so now we just have to figure out what are the signs. We have to know what quadrant is this in. 5 pi over 4, well, I know that is just past pi, so it's going to be in here. So my x and my y value are both negative there. So then I just fill in the table. So t equals pi. At pi, we're at this point here, and the ordered pair is at -1, 0. And then we fill in sine and cosine. And then at t is negative pi over 3, so that's over here. That's essentially negative 60 degrees, so that is 1/2 and negative root 3 over 2. So these are values that you need to memorize. If you know where it is in the unit circle, if you basically know your first quadrant, that'll really help you out. To be able to evaluate these trig functions. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can fill out the rest of these using these values. So if you try this out, you would have gotten these values here. So for sine of 5 pi over 4, you get negative root 2 over 2. Cosine is negative root 2 over 2. It's the same. Tangent is 1. Cosecant is negative root 2. Secant is negative root 2. And cotangent is 1. So looking at pi, t equals pi, notice that at cosecant it's undefined because that would be 1 over 0. Same thing for cotangent of pi. So go ahead and try these bottom ones here. Evaluate the 6 trig functions at each real number. I think that the hardest part is figuring out what is the ordered pair that is at that point. Once you figure that out, then filling it in is pretty fast if you remember the ratios. So whatever you use to memorize it, now you can't have a unit circle during the test or during any quiz. It's easier if you memorize the common values, not preferably, but just like if you look at quadrant 1 and then knowing what all the reference angles are very helpful. So if we try this out, t is pi over 2, that's at 0, 1, x is 0, y is 1. At t equals 0, we are at the point 1, 0. At c, we're at negative root 3 over 2 and negative a half. And at b, we're at negative root 2 over 2 and negative root 2 over 2. So, and then if you fill out the tables, this is what you would have gotten.